Yo, what is going on, Titan Clan? It is your boy King Titan X here, back with another video, and there's currently like construction happening downstairs where I live. So if you guys hear any background noise, I apologize for that, but I will try and see if I can just fix it to the best of my abilities. That, and I would just like to give a special thanks to Neptune for helping me out with basically planning out the story so far. And yeah, let's get on with the video. I will leave the link to their channel in the description. Check out their Day Alive and DXT fused with it. Yeah.
In the whipping, I'm whipping the soul out it. Chin the tone when I'm festing like Pilates. Why you frontin', you act like you somebody. Keep a trail in the ville, how I go by. I was stuck in the rut, I was nobody. I've been looking for something to go body. There's an art to the hustle like yo got it. Kick out a kick back and hit like a new shotty. In the whipping, I'm whipping the soul out it. Chin the tone when I'm
Issei though was unlike the other kids within his school. He was popular, he was strong, he had a physique that looked like it belonged in Baki the Grappler. Many guys envied the boy. After all, this kid was practically untouchable. Issei was a boxing maniac, and despite his size, he was incredibly fast. Issei showed dominance over pretty much all of the school populace. He was too powerful to fight off. No one could really tell him what to do. At best, they could compromise with the boy. Those that knew Issei for a good amount of years, though, were confused by how Issei ended up developing in the end. Before their second year of middle school, Issei was pretty much just like any other kid. He was a bit of a peeping Tom, but they shrugged it off as him just going through a phase. After all, he was going through puberty, so it made sense he would have a keen interest in girls. No one expected for puberty to hit Issei like a truck though. One day, Issei all of a sudden became taller, and it looked like he filled up his uniform far more than before. His facial features stayed pretty much the same though, and the same for his voice. That was how they were even able to tell that it was still Issei. His body was weird, his hair didn't seem to belong to such a grown body. They couldn't really say much about it though, since Issei only ever told everyone that it was just puberty taking effect. Though they couldn't prove that Issei was lying, so they just decided to sweep it under the rug. Even though the teachers ended up testing Issei on multiple occasions, he was seemingly 100% natural, so all they could really say was that Issei seemed to have gone through a weird genetic mutation mid-puberty. They weren't completely wrong either, interestingly enough. Issei did go through a mutation of the sorts. It happened while he was still in his pirate phase. While digging in one of his neighbor's yards one day, looking for treasure, Issei ended up discovering this red crystal instead. Was it a ruby? When he picked it up and put it up to the light, he found that there was some ancient writing on it. Somehow he was able to read it though. He unconsciously began to chant the words that were being described on the crystal, and in a flash of light, Issei was no longer in his childish form. He was much stronger than before, and he felt faster. Issei looked at his hands and saw the significant change in size. Did he just switch bodies with someone? Was this his body? If so, why was he so big? Issei didn't have much time to really think about it though, because his neighbor walked out with a shotgun. Issei looked at the gun and wondered why the gun was pointed at him. Was he a threat to his own neighbor? He was like only 14.
Get off of my property or I'll be forced to shoot.
They yelled toward Issei. Issei, not knowing the full capacity of the form at the time, decided to keep his tail between his legs. He ran. He was more concerned for his safety than anything and finding a way to turn himself back to the way he used to look. He doubted that his parents would believe him if he told them that he suddenly had more gains than his father in his prime at the age where he was pretty much just starting puberty. He didn't know how else he could explain the whole situation to them though. It wasn't too bad though. He was unusually muscular for a kid his age, sure, but it wasn't like he had a bodybuilder's muscle size just yet. He was also taller than the average 14-year-old too. Most were around like 5'3", while he felt like he was a good 7 or 8 inches taller than that. He had to adjust to the severe growth spurt he just had and regain his balance a couple of times. He stumbled since he was so used to being around 5'1" until now. While running though, Issei noticed something. It didn't seem like he was getting exhausted or anything. He actually felt exhilarated, in all honesty. He didn't want to stop running. He felt unstoppable right now. He crashed through the woodlands area and he didn't slow down in the slightest. Issei had no idea what was going on, but he didn't mind this at all. He was having too much fun here. He pinched himself in order to see if he was dreaming. He wasn't. He stopped when he realized this though. He wondered if this was reversible. The best people to go to in order to find out about this sort of information were his parents, since they seemed to know everything. Issei went home and knocked on the door. His mother was the one to open the door, and she immediately fainted seeing Issei's new appearance. He was confused and decided to kneel down towards her level. He began poking her in order to wake her up, but it was nothing. When his father heard all the commotion, he came down to check on what was happening as well. He fainted as well. Issei sighed. He dragged them over to the living room and waited for them to wake up. A couple hours later, his father was the first one to wake up. He was about to faint again, but Issei stopped him from doing that. He grabbed him and shook him awake. He needed to know what was going on with his body, for crying out loud. Mr. Kyoto had no answers though. He couldn't really explain the strange predicament with his son. Issei's home with his mother also disappeared. When she explained, she had no idea why Issei was in a grown man's body now. They didn't know how to reverse it either. They cheered Issei up though. They would go through this and at least Issei would be the tallest kid in his grade now. Issei smiled hearing this. They were right, he was incredibly strong and fast too. He was practically the exact opposite of how he was before. Issei moved on to joining a couple of sports clubs over the years, but the one he fell in love with was boxing. He was a natural at this sport. He liked beating down on others after all. It sounded pretty mean, but it was the truth. He could punch out his frustrations on others and they would also benefit from this. Faster reaction skills after all. Yeah, that was Issei's justification. Moving on. Issei continued to grow taller than most of the students within his grade level. His boxing skills continued to develop until his school was forced to acknowledge him as one of their best, winning several competitions since most weren't even able to hurt him with their strongest attacks. By the time he reached high school, Issei stood at around 6'7", and he had the physique of a JoJo character. He was incredibly intimidating in appearance and could pretty much get whatever he wanted. Who was really going to argue with the Issei tank? Kyoto. He had a good amount of friends too, but most were jocks. People who played basketball, football, soccer. Basically, like, how should I say it? Pretty much for every American, it's soccer. Everyone that isn't an American, football. Understand? Okay, that's all. But baseball, etc. He was even friends with some other guys in the swimming team, but most were just friends with him for his status. It was practically a form of protection for them. No one was going to touch Issei, and if they were around Issei, that amount of fear would extend towards them as well, turning Issei into their makeshift shields. Issei didn't mind though, as long as he didn't get in his way. There was another thing Issei was interested in though, besides boxing, and that would, of course, be females. He was an attractive and tall male who played sports. He was very dominant too. It was practically the perfect formula to gain the attention of some of the girls in his classes. He dated a decent amount of girls throughout those years, but when he reached Kuo Academy, he pretty much skipped the whole dating aspect of things. He wanted to set up a name for himself, so he fought a great amount of the male populace within the school. They were all boxing matches, and of course this was Issei's element. He gave a really mean right hook too. 10 days was all it took for Issei to make a name for himself. People pretty much saw Issei as Cool Academy's new king. He was stronger than most of the guys and faster too. Those that were even able to get a hit out on him weren't strong enough to do any real damage most of the time. They tried ganging up on him though. That failed. They tried trapping him and taking his figurative throne, but that also failed. They ended up just getting beat down even more than before. It was honestly pretty pathetic in Issei's eyes. They had to resort to trickery in order to even have a slim chance at defeating Issei, but after the 12th time in a row, Issei could not take it anymore. He beat every last one of them into submission. Although some ended up in the hospital from Issei punching them too hard, most were left realizing that they had a better chance at winning the lottery than defeating Issei. Little did Issei know, though, that a Satan redhead observed how he fought. There was something off about Issei to Rias. Whenever he fought people, he emitted an unusually powerful and demonic aura. The aura was unlike anything she was familiar with, though. This aura came off as more primal than any of the other auras she was used to. She needed to find out more about this boy as soon as she could. If possible, she was also interested in having him join her peerage. She didn't care how many pawn pieces it took. He would be hers if it was possible. She practically called dibs on him at this point. One day, Issei ended up getting approached by a pretty girl with black hair. She introduced herself as Yuma, and she apparently was a new foreign exchange student. She asked him if he could direct her to some of her classes. Issei didn't see too much harm in that, and he complied. They were around each other for most of the day until Yuma ended up asking Issei if he could go on a date with her. Issei wasn't too surprised by the question though. It wasn't the first time a girl asked him out, but it hadn't happened in a while. Most just observed him from a distance since they were kind of afraid to approach him after he beat up even the faculty members. A lot of them posted it to WorldStar though. A good amount were surprised to hear that a new girl, of all people, ended up asking Issei out on a date. Most needed to build up the guts for over a month just to ask Issei if he wanted to try out their cooking. There was one thing on all of their minds, and that was who this Yuma girl was. Issei would be the first one to discover who Yuma was though. They went to an arcade for most of their date and ended up hitting up a Golden Arches burger joint afterwards when they got hungry. Yuma seemed to enjoy their date and began blushing when they were walking through the park. Issei noticed the look on her face and came to a few conclusions. The first was that she had a fever, which he was really hoping wasn't the case. The date would have been a waste in his opinion if that were true. If she was about to suggest they play Monopoly over at her place, he would be absolutely down for that. He was honestly hoping that was the case, but he had to acknowledge the third option too, and that was she was blushing because she had a delayed allergic reaction to some of the food they ate. If so, he would have the emergency call number on the speed dial. All of these options were incorrect though. She had something else in mind. She asked Issei one simple question, and that was if he would die for her. Issei immediately answered with a no though. Yuma giggled though. That giggle turned into full-on laughter, a sadistic form of laughter actually. Issei was uneasy. What was going on? Two large black wings sprouted from Yuma's back and she revealed an entirely new outfit from underneath. Issei saw this and knew that nothing good would happen here. She reintroduced herself as Rainier and how she was here to kill Issei. She admitted to enjoying the date, but she was more into the dominant sort of guys. Although he showed a tough exterior, it didn't seem like that was how he truly acted. At least in front of Yuma anyway. Rainier formed a spear of light and threw it at Issei. In one universe, it would have connected and she would have left the boy to bleed out. But this was a different timeline. There was no defenseless boy here. The spear didn't even hit Issei here. It was like an invisible wall protected Issei against Rainier's attacks. This surprised the fallen angel. What was the meaning of this? This wasn't in any of our reports. Issei was the one smiling like a madman now. He laughed intensely. He cracked his fingers and neck. He was about to summon his army, but paused. She wasn't worth it. She was too weak. It would be overkill if he brought out the army. His fist would be enough. He walked backward a couple of feet before charging right back at her. Rainier tried to throw another light spear, thinking that the last one was just a fluke for the boy. But the magical field destroyed her second light spear. She gasped when she saw Issei so close to her. He cocked one fist back before sending it at her. She was flung down to the ground. She was unconscious. Issei just yawned. What a waste of time. A red glow happened behind him. Not a moment later, though. He was able to see a fraction of the bright light. He turned around to get a full view of what was going on. He was surprised to see Rias' grandmother appear out of a magical circle for some reason. Was she here to congratulate him on his win? Although he wasn't that big of a dunce, it wouldn't. It would have been a funny scenario. What Issei really wanted to know, though, was what the magical circle was all about and how Rias was even able to find him. Rias looked at Issei's condition, though. She was surprised to find that he was perfectly fine. She looked around to see Rainier collapse on the ground. She was the one bleeding. Rias looked back at Issei and saw some blood dripping down his fist. No way. Impossible! No mere human could take down a fallen angel regardless of whether they were a high or low class fallen angel. How is this possible? Any regular human would have been bleeding out by now. I could have went and healed him too. Maybe turn him into my pawn. But that's not going to work here. What to do? Issei was listening in on Rias though. Rias wasn't aware of the fact she was thinking out loud though. Issei became confused. Was she also trying to kill him? But if that were the case, why mention something about healing him? Turning him into a pawn? What was this chick on about? Issei grabbed her head and forced her to face him. He wanted answers. Now. After a short explanation on how Issei apparently possessed a sacred gear, which is probably why he's so strong, and how the fallen angels were after him for it, rather than being afraid, Issei was pretty pumped. He wanted to fight all of them. Rias, when she heard this, immediately thought Issei was insane. Fight off a bunch of fallen angels? He was a madman. He was asking for an early death. He managed to get lucky with that one fallen angel, but she assured him that there were many fallen angels leagues stronger than Rainier. If he wanted to get any stronger in order to defend against the threats to come, she recommended he join her peerage. She explained how Kiba, Konako, Akano, and herself were all devils, and Issei would be a great addition to her team. He was a powerhouse on his own, but at his current level he wouldn't really get that far. She could train him in order to get stronger and make him more knowledgeable about the rest of the factions. Issei didn't seem to be interested though. Issei was about to leave, but Rias was becoming desperate now. She couldn't let him leave knowing all of this information and not at least be part of her peerage. It would reflect badly on her part. She ran over and grabbed his arm. She offered to make a deal with Issei. If he joined the peerage, she would give him anything he wanted, just this once. Issei thought about it for a second before agreeing. The next day, Rias felt a bit off while walking. It was kind of hard to keep her balance, but she was happy. She managed to accomplish two things in one night. Get Issei to join her peerage and give the biggest finger to Riser ever. Surely this would get her out of her engagement with that Phoenix bastard. Oh, how wrong she was. Once Issei ended up finding out the reason for why Rias was so willing to give herself up to him, he was livid. He was informed of this fact one day while he was forced to attend one of the meetings Rias had set up for the whole peerage. It was taking time away from what he wanted to do after all. His heart was into boxing. not being in these boring meetings for a good portion of his day, where they didn't even really talk about anything of importance. He was glad he was at this meeting in particular, though. A beautiful, silver-haired woman appeared from a magical circle and looked down at Rias, disappointed. She introduced herself as Grafia and apologized on Rias's behalf. After all, Rias was supposed to be getting married, but instead she decided to commit infidelity before she was officially married. Rias was meant to marry a man by the name of Riser Phoenix, but she apparently didn't like the man at all. This marriage was meant to be for the good of both the Grummery household and the Phoenix clan. Grafia was aware of the fact Issei had no idea about any of this beforehand, so she did not necessarily blame him for any of this. It was just used in order to fulfill Rias's desire to get out of the marriage, but it didn't work. The marriage would go on unless Rias beat Riser in a rating game. Issei looked over at Rias and just sighed when he didn't even hear her trying to defend herself. Guilty as charged, they would usually say. He got up and left the room. She wasn't really worth his time anymore. Even when Rias tried to make it up to Issei, he just shook her off for the most part. She tried to drag him into some weird form of training in order to prepare for the rating game that would happen in a month, but Issei just took advantage of the fact he was getting fed here. He pretty much consumed the resources that were being provided and did some shadow boxing in order to make sure he didn't get rusty during this month. He refused to train with the rest of the group though. Even after a month was over, he informed Rias of the fact he wasn't going to help her in the slightest when it came on to winning the rating game. When Rias heard this, her face began to pale. She knew Issei was strong, probably the strongest piece she was ever able to collect, in all honesty. She was placing all her bets on Issei helping out, but now he was telling her that wasn't going to be the case. She immediately began to plead with the taller devil. She was willing to give him anything if he helped her win the rating game. She even tried whispering into his ear some things that would tempt some men, but Issei wasn't fazed. He just made his way into the audience and watched Rias's peerage get decimated. The only one he felt kinda bad for all throughout this game was Konako. She was pretty much the only good part of the peerage. Akano was cool as well, but that was for different reasons. Akano was pretty cute in his opinion, while Konako was physically strong. He had more of a bond with her than the rest of the peerage. He had more of a bond with her than the rest of the peerage, so it hurt a little to see her be one of the first getting eliminated. After all, they were basically sparring buddies as well. It was elimination after elimination from there. They managed to get a couple of Rias's pawns out, but in comparison, it was pretty pathetic for Rias. It didn't take long for her peerage to get overwhelmed and lose the entire rating game. Issei simply hissed seeing this. He hollered over to Rias and congratulated her for her marriage. She looked down at the ground when she heard this and began to clutch her fist. It was tight enough to cause her hand to stop bleeding a little. She felt humiliated right now. Riser decided to speed up their wedding date and have it be a week after Rias's loss to him in the rating game. Issei and the rest of the peerage were invited to the monumental event. Issei made sure to wear his nicest suit and was in the front row. Pretty much all of this was just to spite Rias. He was a very petty sort of person. He was mainly annoyed with her wasting his time and lying as well. He didn't like being used. After the wedding was over, Issei walked over to Riser. He wanted to know if he could fight Riser one-on-one in a boxing match. Boxing match? Riser questioned. Issei nodded. Grafia flew over to where the two were and asked what the two were talking about. Riser went on to explain how the boy, he believed they were from his dearest Rias's peerage, wanted to have some sort of boxing match with him for some reason. He had no idea what a boxing match was and did not know why the boy would want to fight him in the first place. Did he have some sort of grudge against him? Was he trying to win his master's freedom from their marriage? If that was the case, then Issei was already too late, but he had a feeling that this wasn't the case. Grafia giggled hearing this. She gave Riser a bit of Issei's backstory and brought up the whole concept of boxing as well. Issei only wanted to fight Riser because he was bored and wanted to test out the strength of the devil, since the humans of his realm were more often than not too weak to handle his strength. He had some sort of strange sacred gear that gave him an insanely high amount of strength on top of having the boosted gear. This was also the boy Rias used in order to get out of her marriage, although it was clear it failed. Riser laughed when he heard this. It didn't seem like much to entertain this lowly devil's request. He'd get a taste of what a devil's strength was really like and see how much of a difference their strength was from a mere human's own. Grafia set up a ring for the two and she supplied them with boxing gloves. They had a change of attire in order to fit the occasion, and everyone ended up coming over to watch how this event would go. It wasn't every day you saw a new devil trying to fight someone from the Phoenix clan. After all, most were betting on Riser, but they would lose their marbles once they saw it. It was the complete opposite of what they were expecting. Issei was dominating the whole match. He was still holding back, but while fighting Riser, Issei ended up finding out about his regeneration abilities. That was interesting, he supposed. That meant Riser could take more of a punch. Riser trying to land some blows on Issei, but more often than not, Issei ended up avoiding the attacks. Riser was getting knocked down multiple times. Over and over, Issei knocked down Riser, but he would continue to get back up. His flames were practically a reflex for him. He barely suffered any injuries for the most part, but the longer the match went on, the more Riser realized he was beginning to be worn down. He was confused. This didn't normally happen to him. It would usually be that his opponent ended up finding out what made the Phoenix clan so special and tried to find a way around it, only to lose not too long after. At worst, they would get tugged out trying to counter his powers, and he could eliminate them from there. The both of them had incredibly high stamina apparently, but one of them had to give soon. Issei wasn't showing any signs of exhaustion though. On the other hand, Riser's regeneration was seemingly beginning to approach its limits. What the heck? This was ridiculous! One uppercut and right hook combo was practically left. Alright. One uppercut and right hook combo was what practically left Rias completely rattled. Issei was relentless all throughout this match, and to make matters worse, it seemed as if Rias' weakness was discovered. His healing flames were only as strong as his mental fortitude. Rias was facing overwhelming odds in the form of Issei, and he began to quiver in his presence. A direct punch to the face, and Rias was sent once more to the ground. He didn't get up this time though. Medics went over to check on him, since his flames weren't healing him either, but they confirmed that he was still alive, just unconscious. The fight went to Issei. Rias was excited for a moment, believing that this was her escape from the marriage, but Gravia ended up extinguishing that little glimmer of hope. She explained that the fight between the two devils had absolutely no connection to her hand. Rias pouted hearing this. She really had to deal with this bastard now. How wonderful. She begged her brother to find a way to get her out of this marriage between risers, so long as it didn't involve having to fight him in another rating game, since the chances of Issei cooperating were low. He refused to listen to her the last time, so why would he listen to her the next time? In her opinion, it was partly Issei's fault in the first place, since he seemed to prioritize boxing over fighting for his own king. What kind of pawn was he? Serzex listened to his sister and asked whether she even wanted to have Issei on her peerage in the first place. Rias sighed. She had to be honest here. If she knew how much of a burden Issei was going to be, she would have never tried to recruit him into a peerage. There were probably more people out there who, although not necessarily as strong, could have been better subordinates for her, since they would most likely listen. Issei was cocky, and he had the strength to back up that confidence. Serzex heard this and began to think about another person who had an obsession with something that could be seen as unproductive by others, their own sort of hobby which they like to do. He figured it would be a good idea to have Issei meet them. Maybe he would listen to that person more than Rias under the right circumstances. After Rias left, Serzex ended up calling up the one known as Seraphon Leviathan. He asked her if she wanted a new pawn. He gave a description of the boy, and she admitted to wanting to see this kid. It didn't seem right at first that they were coming from his little sister's peerage, but if the kid could take down a member of the Phoenix clan in a fight, although there were no stakes, he had to be sort of interesting. Serzex set up a time for the two to meet, and Serzex introduced them to each other. Issei was confused as to what was going on. The first thing he decided to ask was if this girl was all natural. Serzex was confused as to what Issei meant. Issei went on to explain the fact the girl that was standing in front of him looked like a kid, but her by the way, I am not a pervert. The chest was rather developed, you could say. It didn't make much sense for her to be so developed in that area, but Seraphon laughed when she heard this. She liked the kid already. He was funny. She confirmed that she was absolutely all natural. Serzex was practically as red as his hair at that moment hearing this conversation. He couldn't believe this was really happening. He coughed to get their attention once again. The redhead mentioned how Rias didn't seem to want him in her peerage anymore, and Issei had quite a bit of bad blood towards her, so maybe it would be a good idea to just have him switch peerages. Seraphil explained who she was, and to Issei's surprise, she asked about his interests. This was quite a change from his encounter with Rias the first time around. She was giving him hope. My interests are simple. I like anime, boxing, and girls, Issei explained. Seraphil gasped in shock. You like anime? What kind? Let's see. I like ecchi and magical girl anime mostly. I like some seinen, shonen, and isekai from time to time, but the first two are my go-to genres. Magical girl? Zex? I'm taking him right now. The older male simply laughed, hearing how she was willing to add Issei to her peerage over such a trivial thing. It wasn't his problem anymore. No more complaints from Rias, hopefully, and Seraphil seemingly got a new friend. Seraphil teleported the two back to her headquarters, where they ended up binging a couple of her favorite magical girl shows. During this time, Seraphil ended up making a pact with Issei. Going by Issei's interests, she figured it would be good to have her to where Issei would fight for her, with some sort of incentive behind it. These incentives being that she could give him access to some of the best magical girl manga out there, and that he would also be granted the ability to meet up with a couple of cute girls each time he successfully fulfilled a mission for her. Issei wanted to know if she could earn the capability of watching anime with her whenever as part of their agreement. Seraphil smiled when she heard this and immediately agreed to it. Over the next few days, Seraphil also ended up meeting with Issei's parents, brainwashing them into signing a contract with her to be Issei's manager. Life ended up being pretty good for Issei from there. He liked this new routine since it was extremely flexible, and he had returned to his former life for the most part. But now he had a cute girl as his manager, who was getting him into boxing fights against some extremely strong guys from around the world. This girl's connections were insane, and her taste in anime was even crazier. You could say that, well, she was cultured. Yeah, I know the cringe. While all of this was going on, though, Kiba and Konako were with Rias back at the Occult Research Club. Two cloaked figures entered their place, and apparently they were from the church. They mentioned how the holy sword Excalibur had gone missing and they were searching for the culprit. When Kiba heard the mention of Excalibur, all he could hear was static. Flashbacks hit him. The last thing he heard from them was their desire for Rias' group to not get involved, but Kiba would be lying if he said he would actually listen to these guys. He wanted some revenge of his own. He ended up dragging Konako and Sanji into it, hoping to find the two girls from the church so that he could join their voyage. He wanted to destroy the sword after all. They managed to find them on the street begging for money, and the two were easy to convince once they were fed. It was the least they could do after all. Unfortunately, they ended up getting into some trouble along the way. Sure, they found out who stole Excalibur, but they couldn't do much against this being. He went by the name Freed, and this guy was crazy. He was shooting holy bullets and swinging with the sword like a madman. There was no real finesse to it, but it was a fact one strike from that sword could practically end them. That was the issue. Thankfully, Rias was able to come in on time and was free to retreat. This wasn't over though. He still had the sword, which was an issue. The church girls left in order to pursue the culprit, while Rias went on to punish Konako and Kiba for insubordination. Due to her marriage with Riser and the stress it gave her, she ended up releasing her frustrations on the two more than she would have in any other situation. 2,000 beatings were given to Kiba and 5 to Konako. Kiba ended up looking like a mess afterward. He was sent back to his living quarters where he ended up getting healed by the Gremory household's bishop and healer, Asia Argento. She was saved by Kiba from the fallen angels, and although her sacred gear was taken from her, it wasn't for too long. They were able to bring the sacred gear back to her and revive her via Rias' evil pieces. She was in the middle of cleaning Kiba up when he began to go over his frustrations with his leader. He understood that she meant well in the long run, but she had to understand that this was something he pretty much had to do. He explained to Asia his whole ordeal with Excalibur and these church officials. Excalibur made his life a living hell. Since the beginning was pretty much him being used as a guinea pig for this project they had in order to have someone be capable of wielding Excalibur. Many died from the project though. He was seemingly the only survivor, unfortunately, and Rias was the one to find him. He appreciated her for the fact she gave him a second chance at life, but at the same time, she would never understand what he was going through. Asia heard his story and realized how similar it was to her own. The church being so quick to discard them once they were no longer of value to their needs. For Asia, it was when she ended up healing a devil. For Kiba, it seemed that his value was being a test dummy for the Excalibur project, and when that went down the drain, they were quick to leave him for the dead. Asia truly felt bad for Kiba and began to comfort him while he broke into tears. He vowed his vengeance against the church for what he had to go through. The fight ended up coming to them the next time. Interestingly enough, a beaten up Irina was brought into the occult research club's door, and there was a note attached telling them to make it to the back of Kuo Academy unless they wanted even more individuals hate in the process. This girl was fortunate enough in having been an enhanced human of sorts, which was why she was still breathing, but they couldn't say the same for the others within that school. The group was forced to see what was happening with their own eyes and ended up meeting one of their greatest foes to date. His name was Kokabiel, and he was their worst nightmare. It was chaos for the Gremory household. Even with the inclusion of Sona's peerage, they weren't really able to do much against Kokabiel. And then Freed was apparently allied with the man as well. It wasn't shaping up to be that great of a situation for them. Seraphal ended up hearing about what was going on at her little sister's school. She would have teleported there to deal with Kokabiel herself, but realized it would be better to send Issei. It would give her the chance to really see the upper limits of Issei's strength. After all, she had already tested one of his forms of strength beforehand, and I'm not going to elaborate on that. You guys, just think about that. Moving on. Issei ended up getting a call from Seraphol, who explained that there was something happening at Ko Academy. Apparently, a rogue fallen angel was causing trouble. She wanted to know if Issei could take care of it. In exchange, she would be willing to offer up Sona and Tsubaki to him. Issei's eyes widened hearing this. The whole fallen angel part seemed pretty typical, but the part about Sarah offering up her own sister was, well, an opportunity he could not pass up. He was at home during this time, so he made a magic circle sending himself to that exact location. He wanted to make this as fast as possible so he could get this oh so precious reward. Once he arrived, he immediately went charging in. He was faster than the eye could see. Even the lower-ranked devil eyes couldn't process what just passed them. Issei was too trigger happy at that moment. He was even in his armor just to make this defeat the troublemakers absolute. Issei ground Freed's face first and crushed it. He flung him aside right after and bear hugged Galilei to death. He threw the corpse at Kokabiel, who easily incinerated it. Well, it appeared that there was a newcomer, and he seemed to be rather strong in Kokabiel's eyes. He wondered if the one who adorned red as their primary color could handle his attack. Kokabiel didn't even get a chance to finish his thought process before Issei was already high in the air, gunning towards him. In the blink of an eye, Issei had shot through Kokabiel before punching the fallen angel down to the ground. He mercilessly beat down on a rogue crow and made sure that he wasn't breathing by the end of it. Rias did not recognize who this was at the time since he was wearing a helmet concealing his face, but his aura felt familiar. She was just glad to be out of that situation, in all honesty. Issei returned home and acted like nothing happened for the most part. He called Sarah and told her that he finished the job and in record time too. She was impressed. This kid was really strong. She told him to just give her a little time to set up the procedures for his reward, and by the next day, Sona and Tsubaki were brought to Seraphol's place of operations. Issei waved at the girl. Sona was confused. What was going on? Seraphol explained the purpose for them being here, and Sona was angry. She wanted to argue with her sister for selling her out, but Sarah pointed out that she would have preferred to sell her little sister out and still have one than not doing so and having to bury an empty casket. Sona was shut up from there. As Sarah left the room, she let Issei know one thing, and that was that full-blooded devils had a hard time with reproduction. For reference, Rias was 18 while her brother was over a century older than her. It was a wrap from there. Issei pretty much claimed the two from there, and he moved on to going back to boxing. Sarah was really beginning to make a profit off of Issei's fights now, since they were getting closer and closer to pro level. By the time he was 18, he'd officially be allowed to enter pro boxing and start bringing in the big bucks. Issei didn't really care about the money all that much though. All he was really concerned about was fighting, anime, and pleasure. He was forced to go to some boring meeting one day though after the fight with Kokabiel, if one could really call it that. Issei ended up accompanying Seraphol as her bodyguard of the sorts. It was apparently a meeting between the faction leaders, and they wanted to meet the one who also easily took down Kokabiel. Rias was shocked to find that it was Issei and that he was under Seraph's rule now. He was somehow docile towards Seraph, but not her? How? It didn't make sense in her eyes. What made her blood boil even more was when she found out that Issei was also the Red Dragon Emperor. They only ended up finding this tidbit out later on though, when Valley declared his allegiance to the Chaos Brigade and his alliance with the old Satan faction. Although a couple of the people were frozen here, Issei wasn't one of those people. The descendant from the original Leviathan, Kateria, began to insult Seraphal. She claimed that she stole what was rightfully hers, her birthright. She began throwing several slurs at Seraphal, and Issei, hearing this, began to get angry. Seraphal turned to Issei with puppy dog eyes and asked if he was going to allow that mean old woman to say such harsh things about her. That was his tipping point. He practically leaped out to the building and summoned his army. He even added his sacred gear into the mix and transformed into his scale mail armor, something he unlocked during his time with Seraphal, surprising everyone except for her, obviously. Rias turned to Seraphal and demanded an explanation for how she was able to get Issei to not only fight for her, but also find out he was the elusive Red Dragon Emperor. When did he even awaken his scale mail armor? For crying out loud! Oh my goodness, bro, what the heck? Seraphal giggled and simply explained that she treated him like a human, playing to his interests. Rias tried to defend herself, explaining that she did the same thing with Issei. Seraphal corrected her by saying that Rias really just used Issei to get what she wanted, even when it seemed like it would benefit him. From their first encounter, it was pretty much demands which made him far less inclined to listen to Rias. Sarah turned around and pouted. She missed another fight from Issei. She was so busy talking to Rias about where she went wrong that she didn't even get to see how well Issei would fare against a descendant from the primordial devils. Issei dragged Kateria's unconscious body over to Seraphal and asked her a question though. On a closer examination, Issei realized that this girl was honestly pretty cute. He wanted her. Seraphal thought about it for a moment. She believed they could make it work, but they would need to set up a couple of conditions for this specific individual, considering how dangerous of a being she was. Issei flat out ignored Valley for the most part since he wasn't asked to fight him. He didn't care if this guy was a White Dragon Emperor and eternal rival of the Red Dragon Emperor. As far as he was concerned, if Valley wasn't doing anything that disturbed him or his king, then they had no business whatsoever. They dragged Kateria back to the underworld where they made sure to seal her magical abilities and render her pretty much useless in combat. She was reduced to the strength of a normal human being. Her prison was with Issei. One day though, Seraphal appeared and grabbed Kateria by the hair before flinging her into another dimension. She'd bring the girl back later, but they had important matters to discuss, and that was whether or not Issei would like his own show. Sort of like a spin-off from her own show where it involved Issei fighting a bunch of strong guys and basically beating them to a pulp. It would be targeted more towards the teen to adult audience, and it would be broadcasted everywhere. This series of his could be really popular, and he could be a celebrity of the sorts. With fame came fortune, and with fortune came more opportunities to fight really strong guys. Issei had to admit, the idea sounded enticing. He was in so long as it didn't interfere too much with boxing. Sarah laughed before mentioning the fact he would probably have a bunch of groupies knocking at his door more often than not, so the show would be the least of his concerns when it came on to time for boxing. She summoned the contract into her hand and a pen in her other. She gave them to Issei, and he immediately signed. Now, when it came on to Rias' group, they would have headed off to the underworld for the Young Devils gathering. In terms of Issei though, he would have also been busy in the underworld. Although when it came on to him, he would have been busy recording a new episode for his latest TV show, which was getting rather popular. Issei would be finding great success with this show, especially with the influence of Serafal being involved with the show as well. Issei would continue to enjoy boxing, and he would even be able to spar with a couple of the actors on the show. This helped to improve his reflexes because of the fact that they would usually end up having their own sort of special moves. Although none were as skilled as him in boxing, thanks to their movesets, they would basically force Issei to constantly adjust most of the time, even if they weren't necessarily going to be deadly attacks. Issei would always have it in his mind to take any sort of attack, regardless if it's just sparring or life-threatening. Basically, always take it seriously. That's basically what would be going through Issei's mind at all times when it came on to how he fought. Issei would get interrupted by Serafal though one day because of the fact that she would be requesting for the boy to actually do something for her. Once he was done recording his episode for the day, that is, she would request that he actually attend the ceremony for Young Devils. The reasoning being that she would see this as a good opportunity for Issei to get a great amount of experience. He wouldn't be required to necessarily participate in any of the events though. Issei would shrug and decide to leave not too long after attending the party for the Young Devils. There Issei would actually see Rias' peerage, not just Rias' peerage but also Sona's as well. There were other unfamiliar devils there too. Issei would wave to a couple of them and Sona would just blush though, turning away from Issei. Issei would just chuckle knowing the whole situation regarding them. Issei's attention would fall onto Konako though throughout this time at the party, because of the fact that she would have ended up running out of said party for some reason. This was odd in Issei's book. Konako was never like this. His curiosity would be piqued here, so he would end up following her to the forest. There Issei would actually meet Konako's older sister, Kuroka. The first thing he noticed about Kuroka though was, well, how attractive she was. Issei would find out that Kuroka wanted Konako back, but he wasn't really all that willing to let that happen. Issei really did like this girl after all, thanks to the fact that she was strong and she was actually willing to spar with him during his time back in Rias' peerage. Kuroka would laugh when realizing that Issei wasn't going to let her take back Konako without a fight though. She would imagine that this was going to be an easy fight. Baiko would be by her side and they would begin to approach Issei. He would swing his staff at Issei, thinking that this would be enough to actually take him down, but Issei would simply block the attack by lifting up his arm, having the staff only hit his forearm instead. Issei would throw an uppercut at Baiko. Baiko would dodge just in time though, but the wind pressure from the attack would actually knock him off his feet. This surprised and unnerved him, due to the fact that Issei had yet to seemingly use his sacred gear against him. He had yet to even show any semblance of activating the boosted gear. This made him question where he was getting this sort of power from, because he doubted that this could just be his raw strength, just some sort of. He just could not necessarily explain it. He doubted that this could just be his relaxed sort of strength, him just being in his base form or something. There had to be something up with this form of his. Issei's movements would only continue to speed up from there though. Even when Baiko made duplicates of himself, that showed little effect on Issei. Eventually, Issei managed to grab onto the real Baiko, and he would actually throw him at Kuroka. Kuroka would duck, but he would be forced to take on Issei alone. Well, she would be forced to take on Issei alone afterwards. Kuroka would be barraged by attacks from Issei from there on. She was only able to narrowly dodge most of these attacks. The ones that did connect though, they felt like a freight train hit her. Issei would knock her out and bring her, alongside with Baiko, back to the higher-ups of the underworld. There, Issei would make one request when it came onto Kuroka, this being to claim her as one of his own. Kuroka would end up having most of her powers sealed away, with Issei being left in charge of keeping her at bay from there on. Issei would go on to watch Rias' rating game against Sonocitri's peerage, but he would honestly just get bored halfway through. He would just end up leaving. He wouldn't really care about the results. He would be more concerned about going back to just simply shadow boxing. Issei would find out about the apparent engagement between Asya and Diodora Astaroth from Kiba. According to Kiba, Rias' and Diodora's teams were supposed to have a rating game, but all of a sudden the Chaos Brigade interfered with it. Diodora's involvement with the Chaos Brigade was also revealed at that moment. Kiba was forced to witness seeing Asya, essentially the love of his life, get kidnapped by this jerk. And afterwards, this guy trying to force her into getting married to him. The Grimoire peerage were only barely able to actually defeat him, thanks to Kiba's enraged awakening of his sacred gear. At that moment, he had ended up unlocking Glory Drag Trooper. A couple of soldiers would be formed aiding Kiba in his fight against Diodora. Kiba would also have it to where his strength and speed seemed to multiply at that moment, as he was incredibly desperate to save Asya. His desperation was what allowed him to even pierce through the barriers made by Astaroth. Unfortunately, in the end, it was all for naught though, because they were unable to compete against Astaroth when he revealed that he had one of Opus's snakes on standby. He would simply have the snakes bite his neck, and this would cause his power to be amplified to such an extent that it would surpass Rias's own. The situation would only get worse from there, because of the fact that Shalmba Beelzebub would also make his presence known, confiscating Asya from Diodora. He would send the girl to the dimensional gap. Rias's group would be shocked seeing this. Kiba would begin to cry though. He would just begin to break down, feeling as if he had simply just lost hope at that moment. and ever seeing Asya again. And she was sent to a whole nother dimension, for crying out loud. Sir Zex would make a quick call to Seraphol though. He was hoping that maybe she could have Issei come over and help with this sort of situation, because of the fact that he currently had his hands tied with somebody else. Somebody more concerned, you could say. Seraphol would hear about the situation, and she would immediately send out Issei to help Rias' team. Issei was promised to hang out with Zenobia and Akeno after the mission was completed. Issei would be quick to make his way to the area, and he would see his target, Beelzebub. Beelzebub would attempt to stop Issei, but nothing would seem to work against Issei for some reason. It was as if he had some sort of force field covering him at all times. Every time Beelzebub tried to make an attack, it just reflected off. Any attacks that did actually manage to pierce, Issei simply just healed from them, almost immediately. In the end, Issei would actually defeat Chalba Beelzebub, but he wouldn't be able to recover Asya though. He would tell everyone the bad news. Kiba would be somber hearing this. He would thank Issei for at least managing to take down the big bad here. At least they were able to take down these evildoers. Well, the guys who ended up wronging Asya, so at least she could be in peace for once in her life. Issei would genuinely be feeling bad for Kiba, but he understood as well that there was really nothing he could do in this situation. Issei would relieve his stress by going on 2 dates though after the mission was completed. The 2 dates being, of course, the ones that were promised to him by Seraphol. The first would be with Zenobia. They would end up just talking, going to a fair, and they would also end up talking about their histories. Zenobia would find out about how Issei just found this random gem one day, and all of a sudden, that's where all of his powers seemingly came from, on top of being the Red Dragon Emperor. And when it came on to Zenobia, she would talk more about her history with the church. Although she was genuinely intrigued about how Issei could just become so powerful at such a young age from seemingly just 1 ruby. I mean, she wanted to know if that could actually be passed on like some sort of gene mutation. His second date would be with Akeno. Although with both dates, he would notice a bit of bitterness. There would be a bit of bitterness in Zenobia, and there was even more with Akeno, considering the fact that she was with Asya for longer. This bitterness, of course, would be from Asya's death. Issei would understand what they were going through, well, to an extent, but also realized that really there was nothing he could really ever do in these sort of situations. Issei would meet up with Odin, Rosweiss, and Barakiel. I probably butchered his name again, didn't I? While on his date with Akeno. Tension would fill the area though as soon as Akeno spotted her father. This would even unnerve Issei though, because of the sudden shift of how her personality was. Akeno seemed to be a seductive but sort of bouncy girl as well, up until she saw the fallen angel leader, which confused Issei. He was wondering what sort of relationship she had with the man. This was more than Issei had bargained for. When the date was over, Issei would head home and continue to ponder about the situation regarding Akeno. He would head to the underworld and even ask Seraphal about it, but Seraphal wouldn't really give him much of an answer. Instead, she would shrug, saying that she wasn't really all that aware of the situation. Well, seemingly anyways. Issei would attend the Alliance meeting with Seraphal though as her bodyguard. The Alliance meeting would be interrupted though by Loki and his army. Loki's army would have been composed of several wolves with Fenrir basically being the head of the army. Loki's goal here was to kill Odin and essentially create Ragnarok. But Issei would immediately summon his Juggernaut armor before racing towards the armies Loki had command over. Loki would grow frustrated seeing Issei simply pushing so many of Fenrir's children back without seemingly slowing down at all. Issei would begin to use his boosted gear as well later on in the fight, taking down his fair share of giant wolves. Eventually, Issei would even tap into his scale mill armor, covering his Juggernaut armor, and he would go on to approach Loki. Loki would begin to cower before Issei, and he had good reason to as well, because at that moment Issei would knock out the trickster in one hit. Issei would remove his armor afterwards. He would deactivate from his scale mill armor his Juggernaut armor, and when it came on to boosted gear, that would also end up being deactivated as well. In the end, Issei would walk back over to Seraphal. They would act as if nothing happened and just go watch a romance anime together. Issei would be tearing up after seeing one of the characters end up getting their heart broken though, while Seraphal would just be looking at him like, "You were one big softie, you know that, right?" Issei would end up going on a school trip to Kyoto a couple months later. This would actually be a breath of fresh air for once though, due to the fact that Issei wasn't really going to be worrying about devils, angels, none of that. Until he ended up getting attacked by several yokai during his visit. He would be confused, but he wasn't going to pass up the fight. They would be able to explain the situation though after Issei managed to defeat them. It was relatively one-sided, to be honest. Issei would end up hearing about the fact that, well, the yokai leader, Yasaka, was apparently kidnapped by some people. They thought that Issei was one of these people, one of the culprits behind their leader's kidnapping. But Issei would confirm that, well, of course, he had absolutely no involvement. It's just that he has a magical presence. Issei would end up meeting the real culprits though, which would turn out to actually be the hero faction. Issei would be attacked by the hero faction, forcing the Red Dragon Emperor to fight. Issei would overwhelm the entire hero faction though. Cao would be the last remaining member afterwards. After seeing Issei take down basically all the rest of the hero faction, Cao would try to keep his composure. He would try to fend off against Issei, even managing to actually injure the boy a couple of times. But there was one issue. Issei would simply heal from his injuries just a couple of seconds after, which was irritating to Cao for obvious reasons. Issei would grab onto Cao's face before slamming his head into the ground. He would demand to know where Yasaka was. Cao would realize the position he was in at that moment and tell Issei. Issei would drag the leader of the hero faction to the location. Once he was able to confirm that the leader was not lying to him, he would simply throw him away, having no more use for the man. He would realize that this was a real Yasaka, and well, he would of course return it back to the yokai faction. Of course, he would end up getting a reward from Yasaka. What sort of reward, you guys can figure it out. You guys can probably tell, like, from how the other parts have been. Afterwards, Issei would continue to spend the rest of his time in Kyoto. He would simply be exploring the place and even bring back a couple of souvenirs. By the time Issei would be done with his trip, he would go check on his manager Serafal. He would find her by the toilet though, which was odd to Issei, only to see that she was throwing up. Issei's eyes would widen. He would immediately know what this meant. He would head right back out in order to buy some milk. Yeah, that's basically the end of this What If. Yeah, this has gotta be like one of the weirdest endings ever, but yeah. Anyways, it's your boy King Titan X signing out. You guys already know the deal. If you like the video, like it. If you like this video, you may want to check out a couple of more videos just in case. And oh yeah, if you've been watching my content for a little bit, why not maybe hit the subscribe button? It's free. And yeah, maybe share the videos too to help with the algorithm. Cause yeah. It's your boy King Titan X out. Peace.